on the Level Talk Show.
Knowledge for the people.
Get ready for some of the hottest talk on radio. The On a Level Talk Show is on the air. Let your voice be heard. The On a Level Talk Show addresses issues that matter to you.
Ankhobia with On a Level.
Searching to find love, no hurting, she needs my love. Certainly ready anytime for divine love. I need a in my arms to charm and keep her warm. Oh, and I'll be flowing on and on from dusk till dawn. She's the one who keeps I calm right through the storm. So be strong, do no wrong. She said be jolly good.
Warm welcome to each and every one of you out there in Radioland. It's the On the Level Talk Show with me, Ankhobia. I'm back.
No matter what's the time or weather.
Yes, back for another hot discussion this week.
She's so warm and tender. She's so joyful and high real.
Now today I'm going to be speaking with author, teacher, lecturer, healer and motivational speaker Wayne Chandler. Now Wayne is going to be sharing with us how we can arrive at a proper knowledge of self as men and women. And he says it is through that understanding of ourselves as men and women that we come to more harmonious and intimate relationships in our lives and stronger and more harmonious societies. Wayne does this through providing us with an in-depth analysis of history, culture and philosophy. When we look at aspects of black culture, for example, if we look at music, hip-hop music, whether it's R&B or dancehall music, it seems that something has drastically gone wrong in the way that the genders relate to each other. If you listen to dancehall music and you listen to how the men and women talk and to each other and how they even dance with each other, you're left wondering if we have somehow lost if we've lost that kind of respect and reverence that we had for each other. And of course, some may say, well, the respect and reverence was never there to begin with. But when you look at the dancer, when you listen to the music, you do have to ask the question, what are the cultural ideas that fuel our behaviors and attitudes towards each other? I was reading some time ago about the increase in women being killed in the Caribbean as they entered into higher levels of employment. And some men who feel that they are being left behind in the society and they can no longer provide for their family have unfortunately resorted to extreme violence. All right. So one time in the Caribbean, you never would have thought that you would have men killing women. But now this is happening. Men are killing women and it's on the increase as women gain more social progress. Again, the question has to be asked, where do some men get the assumptions from that they are meant to lead and be higher than women? Where do some women get the idea from that they are of the weaker sex? That somehow we are meant to be subservient to men and live simply to be the helpmates of men, or that to even assert any level of independence as women, we have to come away from the essence of what it is to be a woman. In other words, sometimes we have to become aggressive. Well, Wayne Chandler, I know he's going to help us to answer those questions and so much more. I had the wonderful opportunity to interview Wayne on this show whilst he was touring the UK, and we spoke briefly about male and female relationships. He also did a series of lectures and workshops that if you attended those workshops, I know you will never forget them. Oh gosh, those workshops helped me so much. They really changed my perspective on the whole man and woman dynamic. Absolutely amazing workshops. And he shared with us ways in which men and women could once and for all come to a greater understanding and respect for each other. It was really a challenge that he put out to us to live life more fully and consciously and to once again become acquainted with the ancient knowledge of our foreparents. And let me just read you a little bit from Wayne's bio, because his bio reads more like a book. That's how accomplished this man is. Very accomplished. Wayne Chandler is the author of Ancient Future, the teachings and prophetic wisdom of the 7 Hermetic laws of ancient Egypt, and the brighter side of darkness, a light warrior's guide to inner alchemy and spiritual transformation. And he's also studied the Pyramid Age of Egypt, of Gods and Men, Egypt's Old Kingdom in 1989 in that classic book, Egypt Revisited, edited by Professor Ivan van Sertima. Wayne is an anthrophotojournalist specializing in African and Asian civilization, philosophy and culture. From 1985 to 1995, Chandler was a regular contributor and co-author of the Journal of African and Asian Civilizations. He has collaborated with legendary jazz musician Randy Weston on 2 albums, and he has also worked with Mr. Weston in the Artist in Residence program at NYU on the program of Sound and Mantra as it pertains to the healing of the human body, mind and spirit. And Wayne Chandler is also a motivational speaker and workshop facilitator who has lectured around the world. Since the 1970s, he's been studying yoga, spiritual science, and like I said, I could go on and on and on. He's also a martial artist with over 25 years of experience, having trained in the systems of the Northern Chinese Kung Fu system. Without any further ado, let me introduce our guest for today. Greetings, Wayne.
Greetings.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well.
Okay, it's so good to have you back on the On a Level Talk Show.
It's great to be back.
Now, I read your book, Ancient Future, The Teachings and Prophetic Wisdom of the 7 Hermetic Laws of Ancient Egypt. I hadn't read it when we last did our interview, but believe me, when I read this book, I said to myself, I have to get this brother on the air to come and speak to us about men and women relationships. This book, for me, it really did change so much in my life, and it really helped me to get an understanding of history and how events unfolded the way they did. How did we go from a matriarchal to a patriarchal society, culture and consciousness? So I thank you ever so much the day you decided to put pen to paper with this book.
Thank you, sister. Thank you. I appreciate that.
When was it, Wayne, that you realized that you wanted to reach out to men and women across the world and share your knowledge and insight with them?
Well, I mean, it's because it's a journey,
Yes.
you know, and it's ongoing. It's ever unfolding, you know, which is always bringing you into new levels of awareness and consciousness.
Yes.
You know, so as being on the journey and getting bits and pieces of information, which really create like bits and pieces of the puzzle as you're putting all of this puzzle together, you get to a place where you begin to realize that we live on a planet that is pretty loveless.
Yes, yes.
And then you begin to read, you know, all of this spiritual literature that says that love is the key to various levels of self-empowerment, transformation, and the evolution of human consciousness.
Yes.
But yet we live in a loveless environment. So then you begin to say, well, if we live in a loveless environment, why don't we carry the love? Why can't the love be expressed?
Yes.
You know, where is this love? Then you begin to go deeper into the process, the cultural process, and you begin to see that the culture of which you are a part purposely suppresses and negates the expression of love because it purposely subjugates the feminine force on the planet, which is the force that naturally, universally, and divinely carries the power of love.
Okay, so we end up with this patriarchal system and culture and consciousness on the planet.
Exactly.
Okay, you wrote the book, Ancient Future, The Teachings and Prophetic Wisdom of the 7 Hermetic Laws of Ancient Egypt. Folks, go out and get this book, please. It is an amazing book, excellently written. I love the pictures inside there as well. I just love everything about the book. It just brings everything together, very holistic in its approach to the 7 Hermetic Laws of Ancient Egypt. What led you to look back into antiquity and say, right, let's see if there's any wisdom there that can perhaps help us for these times? Why go back?
That's a good question. I had been, you know, working with Dr. Ivan van Sertima. You know, I worked with that brother for like a decade, a little over 10 years.
Yes.
And just opening so many doors that led back into a time that reflected a very deep and profound, glorious past.
Yes.
In terms of the accomplishments, that have laid the foundation for all African and African-inspired civilizations on the planet.
Yes.
And the information that came out of those civilizations literally was so powerful that it created the direction that those civilizations would take and laid a foundation of which those civilizations would build their societies and their cultures upon.
Yes.
With that kind of information, because it was a universal information, because our ancestors were connected to the very fabric and core of universal and divine expression, which does not pass away. It's more of a right brain comprehensiveness, because within the feminine mind, the feminine or the right brain is timeless.
Yes.
So when you get into the nature of divine principles and universal principles, those principles are timeless, and those were the principles that were utilized by our ancestors in the construction of their civilizations. Now, even though those civilizations came into a place where they began to degenerate and would eventually expire, the principles that they brought upon the planet were just shifted from one culture to the next. So those principles never exhausted themselves.
Yes.
They never disappeared. They just ended up in the hands of other cultures and eventually other races.
And that's why most people, when they think of Hermes, Thoth, they think of some Greek guy.
Exactly.
They don't realize this is coming from ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet.
Exactly. The same thing with China.
Yes.
Very few people really have the understanding, that the first two dynasties of China were black African-centered dynasties, which literally laid the foundation for the direction of China up to this day.
Well, if they watched television last night, finally, at last, it was admitted on television, on Channel 4 last night, that at the foundation of Chinese civilization was our African ancestors. And you had a Chinese scholar on there he said, he didn't want to, he would like to think that they were self-created people. He would like to know that they came from Africans. And in the end, it was revealed they came from Africans. And they asked him how he felt. And he says, we're all one people, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, but at the start of the program, you were adamant that your civilization had nothing to do with the Africans. It was on Channel 4.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so finally it has been acknowledged. But we were also the founders of India as well.
Exactly.
Yes, which a lot of us don't even know about that. And I certainly didn't know the extent of that until I read your book, Ancient Future. I was like, oh my God, this is really serious.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we laid the foundation for every major spiritually inspired culture on the face of the earth.
Okay. Well, let's look at what our ancient ancestors then had to teach us. You talk about the 7 hermetic laws of ancient Kemet. I want to focus on, I'm sure we'll touch on quite a few of them today, but I really want to focus on the principle of gender and rhythm as well. You talk about the principle of gender, and Hermes left a principle which says that gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. So that's one of the principles that Hermes left. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
What was your interpretation of that principle?
Well, my interpretation of the principle is that regardless of what exists, within the world, our environment, and the universal order of things, that everything is divided into masculine and feminine. Now, this can be measured by varying degrees. In other words, within every man, there is an aspect of the feminine. Within every woman, there's an aspect of the masculine. But these levels of measurement are different in every individual. So some men may have more feminine energy than other men, and some women may have more masculine energy, than other women.
Yes.
So it's not consistent across the board.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends a lot on, I believe, genetic and karmic signatures that the individual brings into the world with them,
Yes.
and what it is that they really want and need to accomplish in the world at that time.
So, one example then of that principle of gender could be to say that God, what we understand to be God, is really both a feminine and a masculine principle.
No question.
It's not just some guy up in the sky with some beard looking down upon its creation.
No question, definitely.
Okay, can we use science to prove that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, when you look at just the human body, for example, the human body is divided into various masculine and feminine aspects, whereas let's look at one of the most obvious characteristics and one that most people, could identify with because it's sexual.
Yes.
So the whole process, for example, of the orgasmic experience in a woman, even though estrogen, which is a feminine compound, is reflective of pure, the essential components of feminine energy, but within the context of the sexual expression, which creates the orgasmic experience in a woman, is testosterone, which is masculine based, and literally creates the fabric of the male energy.
Mm-hmm.
But without that masculine element within the woman, orgasm would not be possible.
Yes.
And with respect to men, as men get older, their bodies begin to develop and manufacture more estrogen than testosterone. As a matter of fact, they have found more estrogen in a 54-year-old man than 59-year-old woman.
Oh, that is interesting. That's natural for that to happen?
It's not a natural process. Well, it seems to be a natural process, but when you look at it, there are certain factors that are going on biochemically, that really are not natural, but yet they're within the context of the culture that we live in.
Yes.
It is looked upon and embraced as a natural process.
Okay.
There are two enzymes that literally begin to function within the man as the man reaches around the age of 40, between 40 and 42, which literally, one is called aromatase, and it literally takes testosterone and changes it chemically into estrogen.
Okay. That must cause some psychological problems for some of those men who go through experiences like that.
I think most men, because it has a very profound impact, on the psyche.
Yes.
And that's another, when we look at science, we look at the mind and the divisions of the mind. The mind is broken down into masculine and feminine. The left hemisphere of the brain is masculine, and the right hemisphere of the brain is feminine. And they each have their own characteristics. The masculine mind, or the left hemisphere, is time-bound. It deals with a very tangible, mundane, three-dimensional reality. That's its environment. That's where it feels comfortable.
Yeah.
It compartmentalizes everything.
Yes.
In other words, it separates all of what is. It processes information bit by bit. It's linear. It sees everything and experiences everything in a straight line. It looks for cause and effect. It's into analysis.
Yes.
It's intellectual and deductive. Now, when you look at the feminine or the right hemisphere of the brain, it's timeless as opposed to being time-bound. It processes information all at once as opposed to bit by bit. It looks at the whole. It's cyclical. It connects the world into a connected whole.
Yes.
And in that, it looks for a relationship. It focuses on the emotions, feelings. None of these things are found in the masculine mind. When you look at the masculine mind as being time-bound, that means that everything that it perceives, it measures in the context of time, which means that being measured within the context of time means that everything has an expiration date.
Yes.
Everything dies.
Yes.
Everything comes to an end.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a very death-centered consciousness.
Okay, we're going to definitely explore more about the patriarchal kind of consciousness and culture as we go on. Let's just take our listeners just back slightly so we can just give them an understanding of how this mindset came upon the planet. Now, when we tend to look at ancient people and ancient cultures, we tend to view them as primitive and backward. We say, oh, they weren't as enlightened as us. We think because we have more technology that we're more civilized than they were. But of course, your book paints a very, very different picture. In fact, it shows us as going backward, that the earlier races of mankind were more advanced than we were, and certainly on a spiritual level. And that somehow we're now at an age where we are kind of going backward. But in ancient cultures, how did they view themselves as men and as women within the cosmos? How did they kind of see themselves? How did they see, like, God, for example?
Well, there was very profound balance, you know, and that balance was understood. Once again, going into the gender dynamics, the specifics, you know, of masculine and feminine, because they looked at those two forces as coming together to create any and everything that was to be created. That creation could not take place without those two aspects coming into union with each other. So in India, you know, you have Shiva and Shakti. In ancient Kemet or Egypt, you had Nu and Nut, you know, the male and the female counterparts of the primeval spirit. The Bambara of Guinea have Pimba and Pharaoh, which is like heaven and earth, you know, and the Dogon recognize Numo and Amma, you know, and the Fawn, you know, of the Dahomey recognize Mawu Liza, you know. So all of these masculine and feminine aspects that create counterparts and union that brings and initiates the whole creative process. Only in the West do we find that this idea, this universal concept of masculine and feminine union is not explored and not recognized. That the whole creative process was implemented and instituted by an exclusively male-based deity. You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. All three masculine entities.
Okay, so in the ancient times, it was more about the masculine and the feminine, but in this time, you're saying it's all about the male. Well, within Western culture, it is primarily about the male.
No question.
Yes, the male created the earth, the male running society, the male dominating the home, etc., etc. Okay, was there ever a time in ancient culture where women were revered as goddesses?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the first aspects of culture and civilization, you know, reflected that, because civilization in its very earliest stages, you know, was matriarchal.
Yes. Okay, let's just explain that to our listeners, matriarchal.
Well, matriarchal deals with a dynamic of feminine power that sees reality and experiences consciousness through feminine perspective. So it creates a totally different type of balance that's found within the society at large, within the culture, and therefore the entire civilization. Women are in the vanguard. They basically are dictating the flow of consciousness and how that consciousness is expressed, you know, throughout all of humanity.
Wow. Did those women ever abuse their power? Did they ever abuse the men?
There's no historical evidence that ever took place. Things were really moved along, and the process and development of culture seems to have been one of harmonious accord.
Now, in your book, Ancient Future, you talk about the principle of rhythm as well. All actions are followed by reactions. There's always an ebb and flow. And it's interesting how you use this principle to show how the changes came about on planet Earth. And it's something that's always puzzled me. Why did things end up the way they did? How did it happen? I knew a bit about history and, the transatlantic slave trade in Africans. I had an understanding of that aspect of history. That this aspect that you introduced, that you bring forward in this book, was totally missing for me. And it really kind of put the puzzle together. But just before we kind of go on in the conversation, take us back to 4000 BCE, where we have the Europeans in southern Russia, and just show our listeners how they came onto the scene really and began to change the system as it was from a matriarchal system to a patriarchal system, and which is why we now ended up with where we are today.
Well, yeah, we refer to them technically in the technical sense as the Indo-European.
Yes.
And they were a specific group that came out of what is called the Volga Basin, which was in southern Russia.
Yes.
Now, just like you have different families of black people on the planet, you have different families of whites upon the planet.
Yes.
So the fact that this particular community or family of whites existed there doesn't mean that we had never had contact with whites prior to their arrival, because we had.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, when you look at like the Grimaldi influence, that went up into Europe and helped to establish the basis of European culture and civilization, and also introduced that matriarchal element.
Yes.
Because the first culture and civilizations in ancient Europe prior to the arrival of the Indo-European, or the Kurgan, as they've been called, were African inspired.
Yes.
So you have these communities that occupied this area in southern Russia, which about 4000 BC exploded out of that geographical area and began to conquer all of the then known world.
This is what they call the Caucasus Mountains? Some people call it the Caucasus Mountains?
No, the Caucasus Mountains were in a different geographical place, and they were of a different ethnicity.
Okay.
We had made and established a very strong and powerful relationship with the whites of the Caucasus.
Yes.
For quite some time, in terms of trading, in terms of sharing information. So as a matter of fact, there was a harmonious accord between those whites of the Caucasus and many of the blacks that lived in the areas of northern Western Asia.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Okay, so these Indo-Europeans, they leave their base, they go throughout Europe, and then what happens?
Well, basically, they conquer they go into Europe, they stay within the geographical territories of Europe for about 2,000 years.
Okay.
Indoctrinating, enculturating all of Europe with their own peculiar attitudes, ideas, and direction, cultural direction.
And you say some of these people then went on to become the Greeks, the Germans, the Slavs.
They did.
The Celts.
Exactly.
Yes.
They absorbed all of those different European communities into their own, transferring their consciousness, for that 2,000-year period, literally transforming them into who and what they were.
Okay. So what happened when those same groups, and I know you call them Indo-Europeans, but is it right to call them Indo-Europeans at that particular time in history?
Well, basically in history, the way they were identified as the Kurgan. That's what they were looked upon.
Oh, the Kurgan.
They called them the Kurgan. And as they began to branch out, they took on the characteristic. Basically, they absorbed every culture that they conquered.
Yes.
So when they entered into Western Asia, they came into Western Asia, as the Hittites. And they were known, because they were very warlike.
Yes.
They were known as the battle axe cultures.
Wow, they must have frightened those people in that region. They must have thought, where have these devils come from?
Oh,
what have we done to bring this upon us?
No question. That's exactly what was being said. You know, you had the Hittites, and then you had, after the Hittites, you had the next major group, the Hurrians. And then after the Hurrians, you had the Indo-Iranians, and then you had the Assyrians. So these people literally absorbed every community of whites that they came in contact with and turned them literally into who and what they were as an expression of human consciousness.
So it's fair to say that at one time in Europe, they did have matriarchal systems as well.
For sure, definitely.
Yeah, but these people came along and changed the program. When they got to Western Asia, was Western Asia primarily, was it just like black people there?
Most of the dominant civilizations at that time in Western Asia were black civilizations.
Okay.
But there were white pockets, or Semitic, you could say Semitic pockets, that were basically the Semitic type was a blend, you know, of African and then those that descended from the Caucasus. And that brought forth, you know, the Semitic type.
Of
you know,
person, yes.
That's why Sheikh Anta Diop, you know, he called that area of Western Asia the zone of confluence.
Yes.
It was like an area, a geographical area, where many different groups or races came together, and there was a lot of race mixing that was going on.
Is that how the Indians get their coloration?
Of
because
course.
of that mixing,
Yeah.
and the Arabs as well. Because I used to say the Arabs was a race of people, and people who knew their history better than I did would say, no, the Arabs are not a race of people. They are a mixture of African and Europeans.
Yeah, they are a mixture. They are a mixture. That's why in the earliest teaching they referred to them as the Reds, because of that mixture that gave them a certain reddish hue to their
Yes.
skin.
Okay. All right, folks, this is the On a Level Talk Show. I am talking with Wayne Chandler. He's all the way in Ohio?
Ohio, yes.
Ohio, in America. And he's written a book called Ancient Future, The Teachings and Prophetic Wisdom of the Seven Hermetic Laws of Ancient Egypt. And we're talking here, I'm trying to get an understanding of how did we go from a matriarchal system to a patriarchal system. And we're talking about relationships as well. And people may think, well, this is a different way to go around relationships. But I always think you have to go to the root of anything to understand how something came about. Because when you listen to some of the New Age writers, they'll just say, oh, you know, we have to overcome the ego. What I love about Wayne's book is Wayne has shown us, no. It's more than just overcoming the ego. This is about cultural transformation.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's more than just the ego and you have to make friends and peace with your ego. This is something that has happened in history to get us to this particular place where we are. We will touch more upon relationships and why they're going the way they are today. Okay, so once these different groups got to Western Asia and they began to interact with these various black groups who were living in India.
But see, when they came into Western Asia,
Yeah.
they didn't just interact. They came in as conquerors.
Yes.
You know, so they
they came to
literally
dominate.
came in and decimated all of those civilizations.
Yes.
And so you had a period of several years, many years, where there were incessant wars that were being fought, specifically between the Elamites, who at that time was one of the most dominant of the black cultures in Western Asia, and then the rising via the indoctrination, you know, of the Indo-European, of the Kurgan, of the Assyrian.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Assyrians and the Elamites began to have these incredible battles
Yes.
that would be carved in stone, you know, for
Yes.
infamy.
Yes.
One of the things, if I can remember this, there's a quote, and it's by one of the great Assyrian monarchs called Ashurnasirpal. And he states that I marched from the Orontes, I conquered the cities, I caused great slaughter, I destroyed, I demolished, I burned. I took their warriors prisoner and impaled them on stakes before their cities. I settled Assyrians in their place, and then I watched my weapons in the great sea. I mean,
That is deadly.
It is.
Yes.
You know, I mean, one of my good colleagues and brothers, who many of you may recognize, Runoko Rashidi. So
Yes.
one of the things, because he's a West Asian scholar, you know,
Excellent
and
scholar.
one of the things that he said, in all the annals of human history, it is difficult to find any people with an appetite for bloodshed and carnage to rival that of the Assyrians.
Wow.
So the Assyrians became the main force for the destruction and the overthrowing of the whole matriarchal system as it was constructed in Western Asia.
Okay, so they destroyed it in Europe, they destroyed it in Western Asia, then they
Right.
moved on to North Africa.
Right.
Okay. What were some of the things they did to change the philosophies of our ancestors in that region? What were some of the things they did to, for example, affect the religion or to get the men to view the women differently?
Well, the main things they did is that they took these principles and they literally reversed them. So in the way they did that, because they had to make it law, you know, so in making it law, they had to create a doctrine. So you see this, I mean, the doctrine is pretty set, you know, in various places in China, in Western Asia, in South Asia. But in South Asia, you get a very clear
Where they talk about the laws of
the laws of Manu.
Okay, let me just share some of those laws with our listeners. Let's just go through some of these laws. One of them is, the mind of the woman brooks not discipline, for her intellect has little weight. The second one, to kill women and sujras, that means blacks. So to kill women and black people, one need not worry, for it is not a sin. A mother who remarries a beautiful wife and a disobedient son are enemies, and may be left with no sin. Another one says, we should always act with caution with fire, water, women, and snakes, for they may, if an occasion presents itself at once, put you to death. Another one says, one single object, that is a woman, appears in three different ways. The man who practices austerity, she appears as a corpse. To the sensual man, she appears as a woman, and to dogs as a lump of flesh. Another one says, untruthfulness, rashness, guile, stupidity, avarice, uncleanliness, and cruelty are women's several natural faults. And then lastly, and these are not all of them, these are just some of them that I'm reading from Wayne's book. Women have hunger twofold, shame fourfold, inconsideration sixfold, and lust eightfold more than man. And these are some of the laws that became part of the Hindu religion.
Well, they became part of the Hindu religion, the Hindu faith, but see, it's deeper than that, because
Yes.
those laws became principles, and those principles became themes, and those themes found their way into every religious doctrine on the face of the earth. And so what you had was a spiritually and very gender-biased
Yes.
movement to take place, you know, in ancient times, which excluded the presence of the feminine force. So women were no longer allowed to practice anything that dealt with the activation of spiritual consciousness. They weren't even allowed to go into the sanctuaries, the churches. They weren't allowed to really carve out a path of spiritual destiny for themselves. And if they were found doing that, they were put to death.
Is that why when we look at Asians, for example, and I don't say this to disrespect any of our Asian listeners who may be listening, but sometimes when we look in their culture, we see they have a strong disregard towards the woman. You see it in Islam as well, a strong disregard and almost like a hatred towards the women, the way they get the women to cover up.
It is a hatred.
Cover up, and they have to walk behind the men sometimes. And I'm sure in Africa it must be there as well. I know in China they had the women used to bind up their feet.
Right.
As well. I know in Africa, it must have affected Africa. How did it do that, if it did?
In the same way.
Yes.
You know, as the cultural theme began to spread, it literally infected every culture on the planet, just like a virus.
Yes, yes. So basically, these Indo-Europeans, they had at their heart of their philosophy, one of the things was racism, They didn't believe in race mixing or anything, so they were not into any form of integration. But really, they had this intense hatred and dislike of women.
Definitely.
That we now see manifested in our cultures, but the culture that we live in today.
Exactly.
Okay. History. It's so good to know all about history. It really is.
You identify the root,
yes.
from where these things come,
So are you of the opinion that patriarchy never existed at all in Africa until Europeans and Arabs came along?
Definitely. When you go back and you really examine as far back as you can the historical record, you see this dominant force,
yes.
which is very feminine based and inspired. And this is because when you look at the nature and the characteristics of the feminine mind, the right hemisphere,
yes.
You're talking about the process of timelessness. You're talking about relationship.
Yes.
You're talking about connectedness. You're
yes.
talking about emotions and feelings. And basically, when you compare the two, you're talking about one, the right brain being the doorway, literally the doorway to divine consciousness and revelation.
Yes.
It is the reality, and the masculine mind is that which reflects the reality. So it's the illusion.
Yes.
The masculine mind, the left hemisphere, is based in the process of illusion, where the right or the feminine mind is based in the process of accessing reality.
So do you think that for those of us who may practice religions where we're taught that, God is a man, and we're taught to view the world through a masculine paradigm really, that we're not getting our true spirituality, we're not really in touch with our true spirituality, we're not really worshiping the Creator in the way that we think we are?
Yeah, definitely. We are not looking at ourselves holistically, because if we look at ourselves holistically, then we see that we are more than what the culture has basically dictated to us that we are. See, we are a cultural creation.
Yes.
That's exactly who and what we are.
Yes.
We're not a divinely inspired, self-realized creation.
Yes.
We are a cultural creation. So who and what we are is known only to us by the dictates of what our culture has told us
yes.
about ourselves.
Yes. Okay. Why weren't those cultures of, the African, the Chinese, and all these other cultures, if they had the right knowledge, why weren't they able to resist this influx of European culture? Was it because of the violence they came with?
Yeah, no question. Because when they came with guns, they came with advanced weaponry. I mean, the weaponry that was used when the Indo-Europeans came and invaded Western Asia, the blacks in those areas had never seen such weapons before.
Okay,
ever.
Wayne, I'm going to ask you to stick a pin there. We're just about to go to the news, and when we come back, we will certainly pick up on that point. This is the On a Level Talk Show. Ankhobia in conversation with Wayne Chandler. Sit tight, we take a news break.
Ankhobia with On a Level.
Royal African soldiers, reaching out to all the royal African princess. Woman, Selassie I bless. Naturally, you are the center of the universe. Black woman, today is your day. It is your day. It's a day to honor you. It's a day for you, black woman. My dear, darling, my empress. You are my dear black woman, my mother, queen of the pack. Yes, she is black, as dark as the womb from whence I came. Yes, black woman, you remain the same in mind and character. You are the only chapter in this day. Today, your day, I honor you, African queen. You are supreme to all forms of human being. As the night is today, with you I want to stay. created my future with a look in your eyes. I know you're a blessing.
The On a Level talk show with Ankhobia on New Star Radio 98.7.
To be wise in time of need, you are my only prize. So I say, black woman, today is your day. It's Mother's Day.
Black woman.
Carved and protected my being from conception to birth. Yes, black woman, you know what's life worth. Authentic manifestation of Mother Earth. I trust and I know.
Yes, welcome back to the On a Level talk show. It's me, Ankhobia. Just gone 10 minutes past the hour. Listening to the sounds there of Royal African soldiers from out of Jamaica.
God is believer, yes, a FIFA, you know deceiver, King Selassie I know, and trust Queen of me.
Today I'm talking with the author, scholar, teacher, lecturer, motivational speaker, Wayne Chandler, the author of the book Ancient Future, the teachings and prophetic wisdom of the 7 Hermetic laws of ancient Egypt. Now, if you've just tuned in for the first half of the show, we've actually been kind of taking you through, well, I should say Wayne. Wayne has been taking you through the history of how patriarchy came about on the planet. And I really think this is such an important discussion because sometimes when we look at men and women relationships, these are the very fundamental things that we can often leave out. And if you don't know the history of what came before, then you don't really know why things are happening now. So sometimes you can respond to things incorrectly, basically, because you don't have the facts, you don't have the knowledge as to why things are happening the way they are, why you think the way you do, why you act the way you do. Wayne, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for holding. Because we're going to get a bit more personal in this section of the show. And when Wayne comes back, gosh, I'm going to just try and get so many people to come down and see Wayne lecture about man and woman, because last time he came, the place was packed and his lecture was amazing with the knowledge and information that he shared with us. Okay, now just before the break, Wayne, I was asking the questions, why didn't Africans and the Chinese and these different groups who came into contact with these particular group of Indo-Europeans, why didn't they fight back more? Why didn't they stand up for their culture and say, no, we're not allowing you to get rid of our traditions and our cultures. These traditions have been here for thousands of years and they've sustained us on this planet for thousands of years.
Yes, exactly. And they did fight, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, the wars were ongoing, and it's just that it was, you know, you could say karmically it was time for a new age.
Yes.
And a new model to be ushered in, and that's what was happening, because there were battles. The battles were incessant, but they were to no avail. And eventually what did take place was a shift in culture via the establishing of literally a new model of civilization and therefore a new world order.
One of the things I love about the way in which you talk about the principle of rhythm in your book, Ancient Future, is that it kind of helps me to understand history and to understand that everything has its day. What goes up must come down. What goes down will eventually go back up.
That's right.
Everything has its ebb and its flow.
Right.
In business, one day you have the money coming in, one day the money's going out.
Right.
You know? So that principle and the way you've put it and written about it in your book really helps one to get an understanding of history and lessen some of that anger. Because you can think, okay, well, the ancients knew about this. They actually prophesied that this would happen.
Exactly.
Okay. One of the things they did was to change the mother principle, matter at that time, was to change it, well, matter, which was spelled M-A-T-E-R, was to change it into matter, M-A-T-T-E-R.
Right.
Okay. Was that such a big thing to do?
Well, it was a big thing when you really look at the term itself, you know, because you had the term mater, which spoke to the mother principle,
yes.
And then you change that essential creative principle into matter, which is a mundane, three-dimensional, very limiting and time-bound reality. And this is the thing that is so profound, because words in antiquity were not just words.
Yes.
They were words of power.
Yes.
In other words, every word, such as that word mater, M-A-T-E-R, that word has a very powerful significance in that when it is spoken, there's a certain vibrational frequency that accompanies that word.
Yes.
Now, when you take that word and you keep the pronunciation pretty much the same,
Yes.
but yet you change the intention of the word still carries a tremendous amount of power,
Yes.
but the power has been reversed, inverted.
Okay, and it's from that word mater that we get the word
Matter. Right.
Yeah, matter and
exactly.
and
Mother,
mother as
matter,
well.
exactly.
Okay, but it also, with changing it, it makes one focus on or look at the world in purely materialistic
Exactly.
kind of lenses, and then one goes throughout the world dominating, conquering, doing everything to get power. You can understand why why the society is more focused on technology than actual civilization. People
Right.
think civilization means buildings going up and all of technological advancements, but it isn't. In the ancient
Right.
times, civilization meant how humane you were, how civilized, how civil you were as a person.
Exactly. And that was one of the things that again, Shakan Jojo addressed in his book Civilization or Barbarism.
Yes, yes. Okay, let's move on to today. Here we are. If you said this patriarchal system and culture went throughout the entire world and changed basically everyone's relationship with themselves, each other, and life. How does it still affect us today as women, do you think, perhaps?
Oh, it's
And men as well, because it must affect men as well.
Of course,
Yes.
sure, it does. It does. I mean, it's ingenious. I mean, the design was ingenious because, first you cut off the head. You cut off the head, so there is no consciousness, there is no direction, there is no awareness. And once that has taken place, there's, I believe it was Dr. Amos Wilson. He said to manipulate. If I can, let me pull this to mind. He said to manipulate history is to manipulate consciousness.
Yes, the falsification
To manipulate
of African consciousness. Yes.
is to manipulate possibilities. To manipulate possibilities is to manipulate power.
Wow.
So you have, this period where the whole dynamic of a matriarchal order is reversed to a patriarchal one. So the head is cut off. Now, that being said, when the head was removed, what was put in its place was the head of the masculine.
Yes.
And the head of the masculine dictated that any and everything that was reflective in the feminine order of life must be looked upon as a negative,
Yes.
must be looked upon in a disparaging way, must be looked upon with degradation. So the first place that must happen is within your own being. It must happen for it to be effective and totally consummate. It has to take place within your own spirit first.
Mm-hmm.
You must carry that quality within your own soul. So the first thing was that men began to hate the feminine because that's how they were enculturated. But in doing that, they began to hate the feminine within themselves. In hating the feminine within themselves, they closed off the doorway to spiritual and divine possibilities and potentiality. And that kept them rooted in a mundane, three-dimensional, tangible reality. Now, the key was that an illusion would be created because all now of what they would do and aspire for would issue forth from the left hemisphere of the brain, the masculine mind, which is based in illusion. And being based in illusion, they would live the illusion that they are in love with the women that they bring into their lives.
Yes.
But how could they ever love their significant others? This feminine idea, concept, principle, when they don't even love that within themselves.
Phew. How do we see evidence of that in our society, in our communities today? How can we look at our men and know that they don't love the women, that they're not in touch with that feminine aspect of themselves? How does it manifest itself?
Well, just through asking a couple of questions. I mean, the machismo dynamic is very obvious.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
The more the man pushes himself towards the expression of a pure and total masculine dynamic, he has to omit the feminine element,
Okay, you see
which
that.
creates the balance.
You see that within hip-hop music, within dancehall, reggae music, where you listen to some of the things the men sing about, even though it's the way they carry their bodies and they're always grabbing onto their nuts. And there's this overemphasis on this kind of being this kind of macho man.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it just seems so out of balance. I'm not sure if you're familiar with dancehall music, but if you watch some of the videos, if you go online on the internet and watch some of the videos, I was showing somebody the other day a DVD of a dance in Jamaica, and on this DVD it looks like the man is raping the woman. They're in actual dance and she's there taking off her underwear. This is in a dance, and I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? And I'm watching this because somebody brought this to show me on the internet to say, look, we've gone too far. And I thought, this is mad, because the DJ who's on the mic is edging the guy on. And I'm thinking, but this guy is going to try and, have sex with this woman on the dance floor to prove how masculine he is.
Right, exactly.
And it's just so
that's where
sick.
we are. Yeah.
Sick.
That's where we are in our consciousness right now. And it's because we move with such imbalance through the world, because the feminine aspect, which is the aspect of balance, the aspect of love, the aspect of clarity, has been completely removed from the consciousness of the male mind.
Okay. Burnham, you've been quiet tonight because I know this is information you haven't heard on our airways before. That much I certainly know. So I know for some people they're going to just sit there and take all of this information in. I want our male listeners to know, please, I'm not bashing you. I'm not doing this show because Ankhobia hates men or anything like that and I'm trying to have a go at you. I'm just trying to share some knowledge and some information with you that I feel can help us all in our spiritual journey, help us to live more better lives, help us to have better relationships with our significant others. Alright, it's not about any male bashing or anything like that. We're trying to put history into perspective as we begin to rise once again. As the principle of rhythm says, what goes down must come up. And we have to come up, and to come up, we must have right knowledge. Wayne, when you look at women in Western culture, there tends to be the view that the Western woman has progressed above all other women. Would you actually agree with that she's finally come into some kind of equality with her man?
Well, I wouldn't agree that she's coming to any type of equality. I mean, what is that,
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a measuring stick that is based within itself, within a Western perspective.
Yes.
So one of the things that I really, in talking to people about relationship and gender equality, is how do you measure that? Because everything that you're using, along the line of your measuring stick, you're just pulling all of those ingredients from the very culture that you live in.
Yes.
So you really have to begin to step outside of this Eurocentric culture to begin to create a true measuring stick of what is equality.
Yes.
What is true growth, what is true evolution of consciousness,
Yes.
Because if you're just using the ingredients that are given to you by the culture at large, that in itself is an illusion.
So is it fair to say that the Western woman hasn't reached the standards of woman that the ancient woman reached, the ancient African woman?
No, not at all. But there is progress. There is
Yes.
progress because the Western culture, creates the illusion of freedom. And within that space that it does create that illusion, there is the pursuance, of that idea of freedom. And in the pursuance of that idea of freedom, there's the embracing of various cultural ideas that really go outside of the culture.
Yes, yes.
And so there's a desire that is born and bred that fuels the need, basically, to evolve and to be more empowered, and to, even more importantly, when she is in situations where she knows that she's being disrespected and held in a denigrating situation, that she acknowledges that, sees that, and acts upon that.
Yes.
Whereas before, women were basically made to just, even though they acknowledged it, they were made to just sit there and grin and bear it.
But sometimes when you look at women as well, even if you look at it within the music industry, or even if you want to go outside of that, and this overemphasis on this, the woman, she's very sexy, and she thinks because she can go up in a video and skin out herself and show her backside to the world and wear all these sexy clothes, that she's powerful. But that in itself is an illusion.
It's an illusion.
And she is just being used, really.
Exactly.
Okay. In your book, Ancient Future, you talk about in the last days, it was said that love between man and woman in the last days would become passionless. There would be nothing to it, no substance to it.
Right.
How do we get back to that love? How do we as men and women begin to move back up the scale now to say, look, okay, well, this culture we've been given is a slave culture. It was given to us whilst we were in bondage. This culture has falsified, as you say, Dr. Wilson says, falsified our consciousness, and we now want to create better communities, better families. We want to come up in the world wherever we see black people. How can we begin to make a change here?
Self-liberation, because a person, one of the main keys, to really transcending the limitations that this culture has put on us is to really turn inward and begin to examine who and what we are and begin to do specific things to come into the state of being, which reflects a higher level of consciousness, a true higher level, not just a left brain reflection of consciousness, but a holistic level of thinking, and perceiving things, which means that one has to begin to address the feminine within themselves, especially men, because women, the way women are wired, they can more easily interface the right and the left hemispheres of the brain. As a matter of fact, they do that unconsciously all of the time, whereas men don't really have that capacity. Now, that capacity has to be taught and developed. Where within women it's just automatic, even if the woman has no awareness of her capacity to do that, to interface her right and left. Now, men must begin to really get to a place where they first, through the left brain, they gather an intellectual understanding of the feminine element and the power and the necessity of what that element brings to the entire creative process.
Yes. Okay.
That has to be understood first.
Well, how about our men to understand briefly a bit of that then? How about our men in our community to understand, some of that feminine within themselves?
Well, one of the things that the culture will take, is they'll tell with respect to sensitivity. They will tell men, that they should not be sensitive. They tell men that they do not want to be emotional.
Yes.
They tell men, that you don't need to look for a relationship, that freedom is your inspired direction.
Okay. Is that why some men, when they're young, spend a lot of time sowing their oats?
Well, yeah, because the dynamic of the masculine and feminine energy have their own set of characteristics. Now, the characteristics of the feminine mind is that, well, let's look at the masculine mind first. And this, again, it goes breaking down into the different, the conscious and the subconscious, the voluntary, involuntary, the I and the me, the passive and the active, all these gender-based divisions of consciousness. Now, when you look at the masculine mind is linear, and it's the aspect of the brain that provides a sense of separateness from the rest of the world. It's like it creates a feeling of distinctness and uniqueness. It does not instinctively flow with nature. And that's very, very profound. It has to be really perceived, that when you look at the masculine mind, you're looking at a mind that does not flow with the natural world. It is not in accord with the natural process of things. It makes possible for the question of, well, what's in this for me? And ownership. It's very deeply entrenched in ownership. These are mine. This belongs to me. It functions and operates in a world of competition and achievement. Now, in ancient Kemet, the ancient Kemetan stated that the left hemisphere of the brain was male-dominated, and it functioned on a three-dimensional, tangible, must-know basis, that it was the logical side of the brain. Whereas the right hemisphere, the feminine mind, the female brain, is an aspect which relates to a much more lofty experience and expression of a much, much greater refined consciousness that serves nature, oneness, divineness, and humanity. The masculine or the I level of mind represents a state of being, while the feminine or the me level of mind represents a state of becoming.
I was reading a book recently, and it kind of upset me, actually. And the author was saying that because the feminine is passive and the masculine is active, so he's saying the man is the one that has to go out into the world and do certain things. He was saying that, therefore, it means that the woman must forgo her desires and what she wants to achieve in life and focus on her husband's, her mate's desires, and be his helpmate and help him solely to achieve what he wants in life. And he says, don't argue with me. That's the way the Creator made it,
Yeah, and that's every man's dream, I mean, it's to have a woman. There's a magazine here in the States called Essence. I don't know if you have Essence.
You get it here. Yeah,
okay.
All over the place. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in the latest Essence, they had one page that said it was what men think.
Yes.
And the question they were asking was, do you prefer to be wanted or needed by your woman? Now, to be needed that in itself is a state of disempowerment. So these men, were young, accomplished, men, some of them married, some of them bachelors, but some of them, let me find this one. It says, I prefer, this one man says, he's an attorney. He says, I prefer to be needed. It is important to know my wife relies on me for advice, comfort, and support. I cherish the fact that she finds that in me. Another one says, I want my lady to look at me with wanting eyes, touch me with wanting hands, and listen intently with wanting ears. I want her to need my support, to need the sound of my voice, to need my touch, as well as my passion.
He sounds insecure.
Exactly. So, basically, what they are saying, unknowingly, unconsciously, they want their women to be in a very subservient, servitudinal position with respect to the relationship.
And that's sometimes why we perhaps get into conflicts as men and women, because there's something within the women, well, some women, who are kind of more in touch with their essence as a female that fights against that, that says, I want to be free.
Definitely.
I'm not here
Definitely.
to be, subjugated and to serve your needs. That's not
Exactly.
It's not how creation works. It's not how everything works.
Because in this magazine, they took a poll of all the women readers. They took a poll to see if the woman was in a place where she wanted to be wanted by her man or she wanted to be needed by her man. And 68% of the women said that they do not want to be needed by their men.
Well, it'd be interesting to ask our listeners that as well, the men and the women. Would you rather be wanted or would you rather be needed by your partner? And let us know why. And we're not judging you with your response either. Yes, Wayne.
So when we get into the characteristics, when we look at women, we look at the feminine. You can't disassociate women from the divine feminine. Because it's that feminine energy and the characteristics that it brings with it, that when it moves into a woman, it imparts those universal, those divine characteristics into the female. So when you look at what is a woman, the search for love is the priority of the feminine. So when that energy moves into a female, it creates the need to be filled with love, to project, to give that love and that nurturing to other things all around it, as well as to receive that love and nurturing.
Yes.
Because as a feminine force throughout the universe, this is what that force desires as sustenance to feed humanity, the earth, the entire universe.
But sometimes as women, we become caregivers and we give and give and give and give, and it gets abused, and then we become angry and aggressive.
Exactly. We take that characteristic, because that characteristic is part of the feminine universal dynamic. It is misused, it is played upon, and manipulated. Because when you look at men, who are men? And the masculine energy is a type of energy that is about freedom.
Yes.
It's about, the key words for the masculine mind is freedom and the mission. So when you say, well, who are men? The masculine wants to feel like the bliss of a life that's lived on the edge, a life that is non-committal and that has access to limitless amounts of freedom, and that once the mission, in other words, his purpose, is identified, to be able to pursue that purpose and that mission at all costs without any resistance or anything getting in the way.
But why is it that some men don't feel that same way towards women? When I started the show, I was talking about some of the cases in Jamaica where, in the Caribbean, but in particular I was reading about Jamaica, where some women are being killed because they're coming up, they're progressing socially. And I read one case where a man, he cooked some soup for his wife and gave it to the family to, sit there and drink. But in particular, he put acid in the woman's soup, killed the wife. She died in front of everybody, then took her outside and chopped her up into pieces. And I was so shocked, because I was thinking this is happening in the Caribbean, in a black country. I couldn't get my mind around it. It really upset me when I read the story. And I just thought, what on earth is going on? Why is it that some men feel that they can have all the freedom and do what they want, but then when they see the woman progressing now and coming up, they're not having it?
Because men in a patriarchal culture are born, in their mind, they are born into privilege, which means that they are born into power. And this runs across all racial and ethnic barriers.
Is that why you see in Africa sometimes when you see the men with, maybe they might have 4 wives, and then here in the West, black men will say, well, that's part of our heritage. And you say, well, no, surely it's not. When I read Aikwa Amar's book, 2000 Seasons, and he tells the story very eloquently as to how the women fell and how the men took power And he talks about the devastation that then had on the communities. But, you know, some men will say, no, it's part of our culture to have a whole heap of women.
Right.
And you're saying that's not so.
No.
Okay, let's take a quick break and we'll be back just after this.
I was very moved by Legrand's statement about the state of the black man in the world today. But that be simply a warning. It is not a prophecy. We have been in worse states, but we have survived. I am sure, as has happened in all the history of man, we will find an antidote. But it has taken longer. It is far more difficult to find an antidote to racism. The destruction that has occurred, the shattering of the psyche, is something extremely painful. And you see it all over the world, not only here in America. You go into Africa and you realize the distance, the remoteness from history, from a sense of what one was, what one is. And you have to become aware of the fact that one of the most frightening things, apart from any disadvantages we may suffer, one of the most frightening things we find in many of our young people is they have lost the sense of worth. They've lost a sense of seriousness. They've lost a sense of the capacity and potential that lie within them because they have been crushed far too soon by the appearance of impotence and powerlessness. Only history can bring that back. You cannot look at the plane of the present time and recover that sense of power and worth. When I was a boy in my teens, I almost lost that. I was driven by a fierce rage because I had been told that as a Negro, I was only 10,000 years old. I was the last person to appear on earth. I knew no better. We did not know anything more than that. And that the Negro was incapable of adult intellectual development, and that the cranial sutures of his brain closed down at an early age, arresting further development. I was 14 when I read that. I believed every word of it. I had absolutely no evidence to the contrary. And I was so frightened, I decided I have about 7 years left before my brain closed down. So I learned everything I could in that 7 years. It didn't work the same way with other young men. They stopped. When they learned those facts, they knew that they had limits. They put limits on themselves. They created prisons. Those words, that philosophy, that assumption, those notions created prisons within us so that they could never regenerate themselves. They could never resurrect themselves. They could never find a wholeness within themselves. That shattered world was absolute. That is not the case. We are extremely fortunate in that we have the men and the women who can find the pieces again. Even as Isis looked for the pieces of Osiris and bring about a new wholeness of the psyche, so that we can start again and resurrect ourselves. Because that is the great message that came out of Africa.
This is the truth. Can't you see? Can't you see? This ain't what we're meant to be. Can't you see? Can't you see? Oh yeah, yeah.
On a level addresses issues that matter to you. Join Ankhobia and guests every Monday from 6 to 7 p.m.
Welcome back. I was just saying there to Double P, the DJ who's on after me. I said the phones are very quiet last week, but we did health. The phone lines went crazy. And people were coming in all throughout the week into the station requesting a copy of last week's show. And I says to him, the phones are quiet tonight. And he says, yeah, because people are stunned by what they're hearing. I can imagine that as well. This is not the kind of information you get coming at you at all And I'm so glad for our brother Wayne Chandler, because he really has brought this to the forefront. And oftentimes we focus on history. And these are some crucial things, Wayne, that we leave out
Oh, yeah,
of the discussion.
definitely. You
Yes.
know, one of the things that I see when I listen to programs and talk shows and such that deal with relationships between men and women, that they make it a very personal encounter. And so the lacks, the deficiencies are always personal for each individual, and they completely and totally
Yes.
omit the possibility of the cultural inference for what's going on, you know, between men and women with respect to relationship.
Yes.
There's never a burden of responsibility put on the cultural environment and the various ingredients that the culture gives us to perceive our relationships through, the window that we perceive our relationships through, and the ingredients that the culture gives us to build on those relationships. Because everything that we perceive with respect to relationship has been given to us via this culture.
And that's a very important point you made, because some people really think that, you know, no, I just come into this by myself. I'm a man. I was born this way, and I saw my father this way, and I'm sure his father was that way. And then a woman will say, well, I'm a woman. My mother was this way, and this is how it goes. This is how the world is. And what you're saying basically that is no, it's not true. You were created by a culture. You are
Right.
a cultural creation.
I mean, when you take this one quality, and I mean many of the women in the listening audience, you know, will be
Yes.
able to relate to this, you know.
Yes.
You take the one culture of the masculine, which is freedom. Now, the masculine having that particular characteristic, that translates into the need to not be committed to anything, you know, because you can't be free and committed at the same time. So when you find yourself in an exclusively patriarchal, male-dominant culture that pushes the freedom more than it does the dynamic of commitment, what you get in your relationships are men who never, ever want to commit in order to create a constructive direction in the relationship.
But a man's response out there tonight might be that, well, that's the way that the Creator created me. If he wanted me, well, if it
that's
wanted
not
me
so.
differently, okay.
Yeah, but it's not. The
Yeah.
Creator created him in the masculine aspect, but the reason he moves the way he does is because he's not balancing his perspectives and his directions with the feminine aspect that also resides within him, that tempers the need to be extreme in his endeavors. So as a man moves, when he moves holistically with the masculine, and he's locked into the need to be free, he's locked into the desire for the mission, the desire for freedom. If he's tempering that with the feminine aspects that are God-given
Yes.
within his being, then he's not going to be driven to wanting to, like, as you say, sow his seeds everywhere when he's with a woman who's supposed to be his significant other.
I've spoken to some male friends, and it's funny, when we were studying together, you know, these were guys who had women all over the place. And I remember speaking to one friend, he got married, and I was so shocked that he got married. And then he told me about some of the other guys who'd also got married as well. And I was shocked. I never ever thought that this guy would get married. I says, well, what happened to you? Was it, you know, your father? Did he get on your case? And he says, you know what it was? There was family influences as well. But he says, more than anything, I was just running around with all these different women and wasting my time. And I wasn't accomplishing anything in my life. And it's only when I got married and got that stability in my life that I was able to accomplish and do the things in my life that I wanted to do. You know,
Right.
and so he was saying that he would recommend it that, you know, men do get married.
Yeah,
Yes.
because it focuses, it stabilizes, and it creates a constructive direction. You know, when men are in relationships and the idea of non-commitment, even though it's unspoken, is a major theme that runs through the relationship because it's always in the man's mind. Even though he might be living with this woman, in his heart, he's not committed. So he's still living in a very uncommitted fashion, because the environment within his heart and his mind has not come to grips with the desired environment that's been created around him with this woman that he calls or professes to be his significant other, but really is not in a very heartfelt way. I mean, the masculine is always going to want to experience the freedom, the non-constraint. It's always going to want to live on the edge and live irresponsibly, in a masculine dominant culture. The masculine sexual essence, without being tempered with that feminine balance, is always going to want to desire sexual variety. Even if he loves his intimate partner and is completely committed to her, he's going to want sexual occasions with other women, and how he deals with this or this desire, for other women is going to be based on his own inner spiritual and his own moral development. What type of balance, holistic balance, has he been able to create within his own being to temper that desire? Because the culture, based on the way it's set up, is going to push him to one extreme way more than the other. A man has to know that because of the patriarchal infrastructure in which we exist, there is no way in avoiding the desires. Because a man is born into privilege, like I said earlier, and unconsciously or consciously feels deserving and feeding that purely masculine drive of freedom and experience.
But I've seen it with some of the young sisters as well, and some of the young women, and what they do, because they recognize this. They've been watching their mothers and grandmothers for how long, and what some of them are now doing, they have this attitude of, well, I'm going to go and sleep around and do what I want, and so they come out of their nature as well.
But they have to.
Yes.
The reason that this is happening more and more to these young women is because the culture, the subculture that they are a part of is very male dominant, and in an extreme fashion. So they are constantly being heaped upon with very dense and dark male energy, negative male energy, which makes them have to make adjustments in their own inner core if they are to survive. Now, this happens across the board to varying degrees with women, because if women are to survive in a male-dominant culture, they have to give up more and more of the feminine element that they move with naturally in order to compete in a very competitive, male-driven environment. So they have to become more masculine in their perspective, their perceptions, and their drive in order to survive and maintain themselves in a masculine, dominant society and culture.
Okay, well said, well said. Okay, we're coming to the last few minutes of the show. Folks, I recommend you go out and get this book written by Wayne Chandler, who's on the telephone line from America. It's called Ancient Future, The Teachings and Prophetic Wisdom of the 7 Hermetic Laws of Ancient Egypt, with an introduction by Ivan van Sertima, published by Black Classic Press, and you can get them at www.blackclassicbooks.com. Alright, all of our bookshops, unfortunately, in our community were closed down. So Harriet Tubman went, Yamandra Bookstore went, More Knowledge Bookstore went. They all closed down. It was so sad to see that. So you have to go online now, or go down to London and get.
You have Amazon there, right?
Yes, we also have Amazon online as well, and they deliver books very quick. Like within 2-3 days, you can get a book. It's an excellent book. It's a must book. certainly one of my top five books, and I have hundreds upon hundreds of books. One of my top 5 books really made a profound difference on me and a change in my life for the positive, I must say. Just lastly, Wayne, anything you'd like to say to our male and female listeners today?
Just explore, first, do some self-exploration with respect to what is masculine and feminine energy, because no relationship, and I mean this, really sincerely, that no relationship is going to be able to withstand the ignorance that's brought into it if there's not an understanding or an understanding, of masculine and feminine energy. That's something that I hold very, very dear, and I'm very committed, to that thought that, no relationship can endure without an in-depth understanding of masculine and feminine energy.
Well, Wayne, I give thanks for you taking the time to come and speak with us here in Birmingham. I know folks have been quiet. As Double P says, people are stunned with what they're hearing, because we don't have these kind of discussions in our society, in our communities. Certainly we don't. People just don't know how to respond to these kind of discussions, because it's challenging the whole order of what you know. Yes, the whole order. So I give thanks for you coming on to the air. I'll be back tomorrow morning between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock as we pay tribute to Omowale Malcolm X, who was born 1925, May the 19th. So I'll be paying a special tribute to him tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Once again, Wayne, I thank you ever so much for taking the time to come on.
Thank you for having me.
Can't wait till you come back to Birmingham.
I'm looking forward to it. Get those brothers over there on the move. Or you sisters get together and bring me over there.
Well, certainly. We're going to have to do something, because I know you do workshops as well, and your workshops are absolutely great. So we're definitely going to have to do something to make sure you come over here, because so many of us, we love the work you do. And like you saw when you came last time, the place was packed. Give thanks for the conversation and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, you too.
Okay, give thanks.
Peace.
Peace. Okay, there you have it, folks. Another edition of the Unlevel Talk Show. Like I said, I'll be back tomorrow at 12 o'clock to talk to you about Malcolm X, all right? And not so much into the talking, really, just to share with you some of the words and knowledge from Omowale Malcolm X. But take care. I know you're all out there in Radio Land listening. Plenty of food for thought. Check out the book, Ancient Future by Wayne B. Chandler. Okay, God bless you all.
The Honor Level Talk Show. It's real.
Reality ain't always
Ankhobia, empowering the community with the Honor Level Talk Show.